you and welcome again to our series of lessons. Today's lesson is on fishing. Fishing is the second topic in Geography Form 4. I'll be taking you through the topic, and my name is there at the bottom. I'm Mr. Kariuki. Let us first look at the overview of the topic in general. So in this topic we shall be looking at a definition of terms. We shall define a few terms including fishing and fisheries among others. Then we shall look at factors that influence fishing, both the natural ones or the physical and also the human factors. Then we shall look at types of fishing before we proceed to the methods of fishing. And then we look at the world distribution of fishing grounds, the major fishing grounds around the world. Then later we shall look at the freshwater and marine fisheries in East Africa. Then we look at the significance of fishing to Kenya. Then we look at problems facing fishing industry in Kenya. Then we will embark on our case study. Our case study in this topic is fishing in Japan, where we shall compare fishing in Kenya and fishing in Japan. So what is fishing? Fishing can simply be defined as the exploitation of aquatic life. Contrary to common belief, where we may tend to think that fishing is just about exploitation of fish, it actually involves exploitation of all manner of aquatic life, including fish, including seals, including whales, crabs, lobsters, and even seaweeds. And from the photograph on your right, you can see a crab, you can see some crustaceans, you can see oyster, you can see fish, and even the seaweeds at the top there on your right. So those are some of the marine resources that are exploited through fishing. The other term that we shall be defining are fisheries. A fishery is also known as a fishing ground, and just like the name suggests there, it is simply the fishing ground, be it a water body, a freshwater lake, be it the ocean, or be it a fish pond. That is the fishery. Then fish farming. Fish farming is where you are doing rearing of fish in ponds, and here you provide the relevant and the conducive environment for survival of fish. After defining the terms, then we can embark on factors that influence fishing. In most of the topics in Form 4, you will realize that we normally divide the factors into physical and human factors, and students should take note of that, because normally these days the way exams are set, normally they are specific on either physical or human. So we'll start with the physical factors. One of the main physical factor is the presence of planktons. Planktons, we studied the types of planktons in Form 3, that is oceans. Planktons provide the food that the fish and the other marine life will depend on. So for fish to survive, then there must be planktons, and the planktons normally will grow in shallow water and the clear water and the lit sides. That's when we'll be looking at the major fishing grounds. You'll find that most of them are on the eastern margins of continents, which are well lit by the sun. So without the planktons, then the fish cannot exist. The nature of the coastline. Normally fish will do well in indented coastlines for two reasons. One is because the indented coastline provides safe areas for the fish to lay their eggs, which of course will hatch into fish. So that is one. Because of course where the coastline is indented, normally we have it is protected from strong waves, and therefore become good breeding grounds for fish. The next thing about the nature of the coastline is that indented coastlines also provide the harbors for harboring of the fishing vessels. So again, they will favor fishing in that manner. Then the relief. When we'll be looking at the case of Japan, one of the main factors that has made Japan to be the leading country in fishing is because of the mountainous landscape. The mountainous landscape hinders agricultural activities, and therefore fishing becomes the only alternative economic activity. The climatic conditions, again, if you revisit the topic of climate, not climate, sorry, but oceans, seas, and their coasts in Form 3, you will see the factors that favor the growth of planktons. Normally, planktons will grow in cool waters, and we have said the planktons are the provide food for the fish. So normally you'll see areas that are washed by cold, where a cold and a warm ocean current meet, the temperatures of the water is regulated, and that leads to the growth of planktons, and of course consequently that will favor presence of fish and fishing activities. I've mentioned briefly about the convergence of the cold and the warm ocean currents. They serve two purposes when they converge. One is that it does what we call upwelling. Again, we did this in oceans. Upwelling is where the nutrients are brought closer to the surface where the fish are. And then that upwelling again, or the convergence of the cold and the warm ocean current, again improves the circulation of oxygen. These are animals, and animals will survive on oxygen. So the water must be well oxygenated for fish to survive. We now look at the human factors that influence fishing. Number one is a supply of labor. Supply of labor, of course, fishing is a labor intensive industry, and therefore its success will depend on the availability of labor. The market is also important, since fish is very perishable, and therefore it needs a ready market before it gets bad. Then we have the fish eating culture. The people must have that culture of eating fish so that they will provide the market that is required for the fish. Transport and preservation are very necessary. Transport to ensure that fish gets to the market within time before it gets bad. Then preservation is also very necessary because fish is highly perishable. And when you'll be looking at when you'll be looking at freshwater fishing in Kenya, we realize that Lake Victoria is the leading fishery in terms of the freshwater lakes. That does not mean Lake Turkana does not have fish, but it is hampered by the issue of transportation. That's because Kisumu is more accessible, or Lake Victoria is more accessible as compared to Lake Turkana, and that's why fishing has developed by far in Lake Victoria as compared to Lake Turkana. Capital, of course, all these things need capital. It needs money for purchasing of refrigeration facilities, which can be expensive. Transportation, employment of people, all of that requires money. And then technology. When we'll be comparing Kenya and Japan, one thing that hinders development here of fishing in our developing countries is the issue of technology. Japan has the technology. They have highly sophisticated preservation facilities and fishing vessels if we compare. Briefly, we look at types of fishing. The types of fishing will depend on the type of fish that is being caught. So we have pelagic fishing. Of course, it is the catching of pelagic fish, kind of fish, and other marine animals. Now, these are the kind of fish that live close to the surface of the water. And the examples are given here as mackerel and herring and sardines and tuna, among others. The methods that are used is drifting and seining. We will look at the methods of fishing in the subsequent section. Then we have demersal fishing. This one is the kind of fishing where the marine life that is being caught is the one that lives in the depths of the oceans. Examples are called haddock, pilot, and halibut. The methods here are mainly modern methods like trolling and long lining. Next, we look at the third method of fishing is inshore fishing. This is where you are fishing closer to the shores of the ocean or in lower stretches of rivers. The kind of fish here, examples are there. We have shellfish. We also have lobsters and prawns and crabs. These are marine animals that will exist closer to the shores of the ocean. The methods here, you can use nets, and you can also use a hook and line method. Then we have freshwater fishing. This is fishing in streams and ponds and lakes that these are inland bodies. So the main fish here is a sturgeon. We have the common carp, very common in Naivasha. We have tilapia, and we also have trout. Trout does well in cold areas. The methods are line and drifting methods, the methods that are used in freshwater fishing. Having looked at the types of fishing, then we can look at the methods themselves, the methods of fishing. We have traditional methods, and we also have the modern methods. Among the traditional methods is where we use a basket method. You are using the basket is here shown in this diagram below there. The basket, you'll put a bait inside that basket, and then immerse it in water or submerge it in water and scoop fish. I will refer you to a documentary by called Planet Earth. If you go to the one about deserts, you'll find people using the basket method in shallow water fishing somewhere in Mali, in the middle of the desert. Then we have harpooning. Harpooning is also a very traditional method where you are literally using a sharp stick or an arrow to literally strike the fish. Again, on the same documentary, but this time it's about oceans. You can see harpooning in real life, and actually the harpooning that is in that video is a harpooning of the other method of traditional method of fishing is the barrier method. The barrier method is where you use a net like the one that is shown below there. So you'll put this downstream, especially when the river is in flood. So the fish that are being washed by the excess water when the river is in flood will be caught up in this barrier where you can collect the fish. Then we have the use of herbs. The herbs that are supposed to make the fish unconscious, and of course the herbs must not be dangerous to humans, so you use that, and then you collect the fish when they are unconscious. We have the use of a lamp and a net. The lamp is going to attract the fish at night, and which will be caught up in the net. Then we have the hook and line, which is common, and I think this one most of us understand, where you use a hook. You hook some bait on that hook, and then using the line you throw it into the water, so the fish will be caught by the gills by that hook. Then the gill nets. The gill nets are nets where the fish is able to enter, and then it is caught by the gills. It is not able to move back. We move on to the modern methods of fishing. We'll start by looking at seining. Seining is used to catch especially pelagic fish, and also anadromas. Anadromas are migratory fish that move in large numbers or shoals. So you can see the net there that is pulled by two trolleys or trawlers or boats simply, and then the fish will get into that net and be caught up in the net. Now the basket is kept afloat because of course it has to keep open so that the fish will get in. So it is kept open and held in a position by floats which are on top of the water, and then weights at the bottom will also ensure that the mouth of that net remains open. Now the one problem associated with this method of seining is overfishing, because it does discriminate fishing. All manner of fish that get into the net will be caught up by that. Secondly, we look at trolling. Trolling is a method that is used in catching of demersal fish, which we said live at the bottom of the ocean. Just like seining, the net that we'll see is kept afloat using floats, and then it is dragged at the bottom of the ocean using some weights. And simply, just like seining, this one again leads to indiscriminate fishing. And you can see the boat there, and the trawler and the net are shown in that diagram there, or the photo. Finally, we look at the last method of modern fishing, what we call line fishing. It is simply similar to the hook and line that we are used to, but this time we use a line that has many hooks. Now this method is used in catching of demersal fish, which we have said over and over that they live at the bottom of the ocean. So the fishing boats will spread many hooks that are baited. The bait will attract the fish, and then which of course will be caught by the hooks, and then the work of the fishermen is to remove the fish from the baits and move them for refrigeration in containers. Having looked at the methods of fishing, we can now proceed to the distribution of the major fishing grounds in the world. We shall provide, I have provided a map there that shows some of the major fishing grounds of the world. It is important to note that fishing is commonly practiced in the northern hemisphere, of course because of the conditions that we have looked at before, and we'll still go to the specific physical conditions that favor fishing in these fishing grounds, specifically each of them. If you look at our map around the equator, you will note that we do not have a lot of or advanced fishing grounds, for reasons that we shall be looking at in this section. So in this we shall start by the Atlantic fishing grounds, of course, which are found in the Atlantic Ocean. Now here we can divide the Atlantic fishing grounds into the northwest Atlantic fishing grounds. You should always refer to the map, and this one is located in the east coast of North America. Now the eastern coasts of continents from our geography in Form 3, they are washed by warm ocean currents, or they are literally they are warmer because of the direct sunlight. So when they are washed by a cold ocean current, that moderates the temperatures of the water, and therefore you'll find fish doing well in those conditions. Specifically, you can see some of the fishing grounds there. We have the Grand Bank, we have the Sable Bank, we have the George Bank and the Nova Scotia, all these in Canada. The most common fish here are called herring, mackerel, and lobsters. Lobster is not a fish, but it is part of the aquatic life that is exploited here. Now, the factors Very important, especially for purposes of exams, because you'll always be asked what factors favor the development of fishing in a certain area. One is a large continental shelf. That is always a factor. Where we have a large continental shelf, it gives room for the growth of planktons. So that factor, we will find it being common in all the other fishing grounds. Number two is where we have a convergence of a warm and a cold ocean current. In this case specifically, remember, for case studies, you have to be specific. Now for this case, the currents that are converging is a warm Gulf Stream current and the cold Labrador current. Now what happens is that when a warm and a cold ocean current meet, then they do several things. One is that they do what we call upwelling of nutrients. So the nutrients are available for the planktons to grow and therefore favor the survival of fish. Secondly, what they do is that they will also regulate the temperatures of the water. We are in the extreme north, and not very extreme, but at least in the tropics, and not in the tropics, but in the temperate regions. Canada is one area where freezing is a common thing during winter. But because of the availability of the warm Gulf Stream, the temperatures of the water here are regulated, and therefore it becomes frost free, and therefore will allow fishing to take place throughout the year. The other factor is the cold climate and the rugged landscape. Yes, again, Canada, here we have talked about Nova Scotia. These are areas that are completely cold, especially during winter. So that discourages farming activities, and the only alternative economic activity that is left in these regions is fishing. So fishing becomes a very popular activity because agriculture is not there. The other thing is the population of the surrounding areas. Canada, the US has a population of 300 million citizens. The people may be a little bit less in Canada, but the states, the Connecticut and the Massachusetts here, I hope I pronounced it right. These are areas where the population is high. Probably you should Google the population in these two states in the United States, and that therefore provides a ready market. Remember, knowledge is interconnected. We said earlier that fish is a perishable commodity. So if fish does not have a ready market, then definitely it will go bad within a short period of time. So we need to have a market for the fish. The other one is a highly developed technology. We are talking about the United States and Canada. These are some of the most advanced countries of this world. That allows for fishing throughout the year because they have a sophisticated technology that will allow monitoring. We are talking about the radar systems here to forecast storms so that fishermen are safe and they can do their fishing with safety. Wireless communication processing is also high. Storage facilities, a lot of refrigeration is needed because fish will go bad easily. So we need these facilities to facilitate fishing, and this being some of the most developed countries of the world, then the technology is available. Now, moving on to the northeast Atlantic fishing grounds. These ones are located in the west coasts of Europe. Again, the west coasts are normally a little bit cold because they do not receive the direct sunlight. But again, where we have a warm ocean current flowing in these areas, then it moderates the temperatures and therefore allows fishing to take place. Specifically, here we have countries like France, we have Germany, We have Denmark, Britain, and the Norway. They are the main fishing grounds here. They are European countries on the west of Europe. Now, the fish, again, we have herring, mackerel, and cod. They are the main fish that are caught in these fishing grounds. Now, the factors. One is numerous sea inlets or an irregular coastline. Irregular coastlines again serve two purposes. Now, one is the anchoring of boats. Now, fjords, I am sure we have studied this in Form 3 and how fjords form. Fjords form deep waters. Now, these deep waters will provide natural harbors for the anchoring of fishing boats. Secondly, what the sea inlets do is that they protect the inland or the water that is inland from strong waves, and therefore they become good fishing or good sites for the breeding of fish. So those are the two things that indented coastlines serve. And here, if you look at our map, you will see a lot of indents in the coastlines here. The rugged landscape, again, which is unfavorable for agriculture. The ruggedness here in some of these countries, the Scandinavian countries like Norway, is because of the glacial action. Glacier serves a lot. If you revise our Form 3 work, glacier transforms the landscape. And in this area, the glaciers will make the landscape rugged and therefore unfavorable for agriculture. And as we said in the previous fishing ground, then fishing becomes the alternative economic activity in these regions. Then we have two ocean currents. Not two, but we have the warm Atlantic drift current. Now, we have said the western coasts are cold, or they are relatively cold because they do not receive direct sunlight as compared to the eastern margins of continents. Now, the availability of the warm Atlantic current here then will moderate the temperatures, making it relatively cool and therefore favorable for the growth of planktons, which of course in turn provides food for the fish and therefore survival of fish. Next is the large continental shelf. We say this is a point that we will always score. The wide continental shelf will provide an extensive area for the growth of planktons, which fish with food. Now, the other factor is the land is derived from minerals brought by icebergs from the land. We have said this is a glaciated land, and therefore the land is derived from minerals. The minerals will be washed down into the ocean and therefore will allow for the growth of planktons. The dense and affluent here meaning rich, West Europe, the countries that we have seen there are all rich countries. The likes of Denmark, Norway, the Great Britain, they are big economies and therefore they provide a ready market for the fish. Highly developed technology. We said highly developed technology will allow deep sea fishing. It will also allow fishing throughout the year. And again, these are some of the most technologically advanced countries. We move on to the next fishing ground, that is the South Atlantic fishing grounds. This time we move to the southern hemisphere, which is the areas around South Africa. We have the north. Before we move to the south of Africa, we have two of them. We have the northwest of Africa, that is at the coast of Mauritania in the northern parts of Africa. Now the factors here. Now remember, most parts of Africa are warm, and these conditions do not favor fishing. So what favors fishing in most parts of these fishing grounds that we are talking about here is the regulating effects of either a cold or a warm ocean current, as we are going to see, especially a cold ocean current, because we have said the waters are warm and therefore the temperatures need to be regulated using a cold ocean current. For instance, in the case of north of Africa, we have the cold Canary Current. Now, the cold Canary Current cools down the warm tropical waters in this region and therefore allows the survival of fish. Secondly is a wide and fairly shallow continental shelf. We say these points and the students should remember. Remember, a good student should always get the points that are easy to understand and to remember. So we said a shallow continental shelf is one factor that will feature in almost all the fishing grounds. Now, a wide and fairly shallow continental shelf, we said, will allow for the growth of planktons and therefore encourage survival of fish. We move to the southwest of Africa. This specifically in the Cape Province of South Africa in the Namibia. Here the factors again, we have the cold Benguela current. The cold Benguela current will regulate the warm tropical waters and therefore allow for the growth of planktons and also for the survival of fish. Now, the west coast of South America, these are regions of Peru on the western margins of the South American continent. Now, the factors here, the same point, the presence of a shallow continent, that should be a shallow continental shelf. Please add that. Then the prevailing Peruvian current, which again will favor the growth of planktons. The Peruvian current again will regulate the temperatures of the waters and therefore allow growth of planktons and the survival of fish. Now, those are the Atlantic fishing grounds. From there, we move now to the Pacific Ocean and we look at some of the most favorable fishing grounds within the Pacific Ocean. To start with, we look at the Northeast Pacific fishing grounds. This is towards the north and the eastern, the eastern margins of the American continent, and here we located along the west coast of North America comprising of Canada and the United States. Specifically, we have Alaska on the west of North America. It's a state in America, or the United States of America, with a long history if you want to read. As a geography student, always love knowing things. So when you see a new place like Alaska or the British Columbia, always be eager to know more about what this British Columbia is. So this Alaska was once owned by the Russian Federation, or commonly the USSR, before it was sold to the United States. A decision that the Russian Federation regrets to date. Then you have the Oregon states. From the Oregon to California, those are states within the United States of America. The common fish here is salmon. The factors that have favored this as a major fishing ground, one is the warm North Pacific current. Being in the northern hemisphere and extreme north, here temperatures are low, especially during winter. Then warm ocean current here serves to regulate the temperatures and therefore make fishing possible throughout the year. It also favors the growth of planktons. If you visit Form 3 work, look at how the factors that will favor growth of planktons and also the factors that will favor corals, because all these work in ensuring that or in developing a fishing ground. Number two is a sheltered coastline. We talked about the sheltering. The sheltering here is where we have water or the ocean water moving inland, where we have an indented coastline or an irregular coastline, which we said will serve two purposes: creating good harbors for fishing vessels, and also good breeding grounds for fish because they are sheltered from strong waves. Then we have several rivers and lakes which again favor inland kind of fishing or freshwater fishing, being an area that is glaciated or say is under glaciation. That creates a lot of lakes. Remember, some of the features that result from glaciation are rivers from melting glaciers, and then we have numerous lakes ranging from kettle lakes to ribbon lakes to cirque lakes and so on. We continue with the factors. The other factor that has favored this as a major or as a well-developed fishing ground is the rugged and mountainous landscape of this region, which is characterized by forest cover. The forest covers of Canada, north of Canada, the coniferous forests that we looked at in Form 2, we revisit them here. Now, this area being rugged, and the ruggedness here, as we have talked over and over, is being caused by glacial action. These glaciated highlands do not favor agricultural activities, and therefore fishing is left as the main activity or economic activity in this region. Lastly is the ready market from the affluent Canada and the US. Canada and the US are some of the most developed and most rich. Affluent here again means rich, so they are rich and therefore they provide a ready market for fish. We look at the Northwest Pacific fishing grounds. These ones are located in the coast of northeast of Asia. Now, this is the main fishing ground. It's the largest fishing ground of this world. We shall revisit it and we shall discuss it in details when we'll be looking at the case study in Japan or fishing in Japan. But notably, the Northwest Pacific fishing ground is the most, or is the largest fishing ground, producing more than a sixth of the wild fish from Japan alone. It extends from Beijing, the capital of China, southwards the China Sea, again a very contested part known as the China Sea, between Japan and Russia and China, then all the way to Malaysia and Indonesia. The main fish here are salmon, mackerel, cod, sardines, eels, and also trout. The factors that have favored this as the main fishing ground in this world, the main factor or the common factor is the broad and shallow continental shelf, which allows, of course, for the growth of planktons, leading to occurrence of more fish. We have two cold ocean currents, and I mean two currents converging here. We have the Oya Siwo and the Kuro Siwo currents. Now, we said when a warm and a cold ocean current meet, then they lead to upwelling of nutrients. They also lead to regulations of the temperatures of the water, and they also allow for the oxygenation. Upwelling will allow for the oxygenation of the water, making it favorable for fish survival. Then we have numerous islands, like Japan alone is made of more than 600 islands. We have bays, we have sheltered inlets. Japan is, and all this region after all, is a very active volcanic region. Now, because of that, we have a lot of islands. Now, these islands and bays and inlets, all they serve to create an irregular coastline, which we have talked all over. that it provides good harboring grounds for fishing vessels, and of course it also makes sure that the inlets are well sheltered from strong waves, and that makes them favorable breeding grounds for fish. Now the area is also mountainous. Again, this one will discourage agriculture and make fishing the alternative economic activity, and we'll see that when you come to the case of Japan, fishing becomes the main activity here. There's also a large and ready market due to the high population of the Asian countries. I think the better part of the population of the world is in these Asian countries. China, we have talked about the China here. China has a population of 3 billion. Out of the 7 billion people of the world, 2 point something billion are from China. Japan also has a population of about 300 million. We shall go to the details of that later. And all these countries around here are highly populated. That provides the ready market that is required for fishing to be economical. Then the technology part. I think Japan is undoubtedly one of the most technologically advanced countries of this world. That makes it have excellent refrigeration facilities, processing equipment. They have fishing vessels that will move to the ocean. They will do the fishing, they do the processing, and on coming back the fish is already canned and ready for export. Electronic communication here will allow efficient movement of vessels within the ocean to reduce the risks of typhoons. Again, remember, this is an area that is affected by typhoons, so having electronic communication ensures. Now, having looked at the major fishing grounds of the world, we shall come closer home. And closer home, we will be looking at freshwater and marine fisheries in East Africa. In East Africa, we shall be looking at mainly Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. It is important to mention at this point that marine fisheries in East Africa are not well developed for reasons that we shall be looking at. So mainly in East African region, what we practice is freshwater fishing. Now, when it comes to marine fishing, it contributes to just about 10% of the catch in Kenya and just about 13% in Tanzania. So just that, like I had mentioned, you can see marine fishing is not well developed in this East African region. It just accounts for about 10 to 13%. Of course, we have none in Uganda because it is a landlocked country. The main fish here are pelagic fish, kind of fish. We have tuna, we have kingfish, we have mullet, we have bonito, and sardines. Now here, fishing is done on a small scale, mainly for subsistence, only for the people that live around the marine water bodies, that's mainly the Indian Ocean. So they will do it just for their personal consumption, but still they will have a few or in excess to sell to the local community. Now, notably, again, there's the use of simple tools. Here we have dhows and canoes, mainly dhows, and homemade or improvised fishing nets. Now, in Kenya, we have a few motorized boats with refrigerators. In Tanzania, they mainly use dhows, which are guided by wind, and rarely do we have motorized kind of boats in that area. Now, it is mainly undertaken by the coastal communities. If you go to Mombasa and to the coast of Kenya, you'll find the local communities are the ones that are involved in fishing. Now, why is this fishing We have said it only accounts for about 10% in Kenya and 13% in Tanzania. So why is it that this marine fishing is not that well developed in this region? We have both physical reasons and we also have the human reasons. One of the physical ones is the warm tropical waters. We are within the tropics. We are right under the equator. The equator literally cuts Kenya into almost two equal halves. Now, the warm tropical waters do not favor the growth of planktons. They also don't favor the survival of fish, and therefore the number of fish in this region is relatively low. Next is the deep and the narrow continental shelf, especially if you move towards the sides of Kilifi. Kilifi, I'm told it comes from the word cliff. Now, if it is a cliff, then it becomes it creates just a narrow continental shelf. And the continental shelf, we said, is very necessary in terms of giving a wider area for the growth of planktons. So when it is narrow and deep, then it does not favor growth of planktons, and therefore fish is limited in this region. Inadequate market for two reasons. Now this is human. Low purchasing power. Most of the people, we are a third world country, commonly known as developing countries, and recently upgraded to a middle income country. But you'll find most of our population, fish is a luxury. So you'll find it only being eaten by those who are able to. So not many people in this country can afford fish, and therefore the market is not as much favorable. Now we have undeveloped transport network to the interior of the country. Now fish needs to get to the market as soon as possible. Now we do not have that developed transport network to ensure that the produce is submitted or delivered to the market within time before it gets bad. Although we have made tremendous strides in terms of development of roads and also having an international airport in Mombasa and also in Lamu. Then we have agricultural products in some coastal areas. So we do not have a problem in terms of provision of food. With the people of the coast, especially to the sides of Lamu, they are agriculturally very productive, and therefore fishing is not as much the only alternative that we have. We have other agricultural activities being practiced. Inadequate market is a point that we'll always score for a candidate. We are in a third world country or a developing country, so that much technology that we'll talk about when it comes to Japan is limited for us, and therefore you'll find fishing being restricted to just a few meters from the shores of the ocean, which of course will limit the catch. We have stiff competition from industrialized countries. We cannot literally compete with some of these countries in terms of fishing, and because we are in a global community, we will find commodities coming from other countries. You just visit a supermarket and look for these canned fish. You'll find that none of them is from this country. So that again discourages the people that conduct fishing here. Inadequate refrigeration facilities. Being again in a developing country, refrigeration is not readily available to a local fisherman in the coasts of our country. And then we have unpopularity of fishing as an economic activity. Fishing, we don't do it as much as an economic activity. It is unpopular Fish eating is also unpopular among many communities of this country, and therefore fishing has not been developed. Then we also have strong sea tides and waves, and having poor kind of fishing vessels, then having strong waves can be disastrous for us. Now, moving from freshwater fishing now to from the marine fishing to freshwater fisheries in Kenya. We have said this is more common in East African region as compared to the marine kind of fishing, for reasons that we shall look at. Now, the main freshwater fisheries of this country, the main one is Lake Victoria. That is where fishing is practiced on a large scale. We also have some fishing in Naivasha, Lake Naivasha. We have Lake Baringo, we have Jipe, Chala, Balisa, and Shakababo in the lower parts of Tana, in Kanyaboli, somewhere in Siaya, and the Sare in the Yata Delta. Of course, in also in many rivers. We have mentioned that it is more exploited as opposed to marine fisheries for reasons we shall look at, and for reasons we have already looked at why marine fishing is not that developed. Now there's the use of simple equipment like the use of lamps in Naivasha, but you'll find Lake Victoria having trawlers. We have said it's the main fishery, and here fishing is developed. Fish is mainly for it's sold to the middlemen at minimal prices. This is one big problem that is caused by the fact that we do not have a coordinated kind of fishing and marketing, So you'll find individuals that do the fishing will sell the fish to middlemen at minimal prices. These middlemen will move the commodities that are fish to distant markets, to Nairobi, and once they reach Nairobi, the price drastically changes, and they will sell at exorbitant prices. So you'll find the fishermen not developing that much, but the middlemen will make a kill from this sector. Now the rest of the fish that is not transported to distant markets is smoked and salted for preservation, also sun-dried and sold locally. You go to Lake Victoria, just next to the lake, you'll find fish being sold there in their numbers. The main species here is tilapia. Tilapia is a common kind of fish in this country, although their numbers are dwindling in this country. The others are herring. We have the Nile perch, and we have omena, which is very common, especially to the university comrades. Now, the factors that favor the Lake Victoria as the main fishing ground in this country. The lake is shallow, and I like to remind my students that always this knowledge is interconnected. Refer to Form 2, internal land forming processes. Then again move to Form 3, work lakes. Now this Lake Victoria is a lake that is formed by downwarping. One of the characteristics of these lakes is that they are shallow. Lake Victoria is shallow. It's just about 83 meters. Now the shallowness here allows for light to penetrate, and that will allow the growth of planktons. Planktons need light for photosynthesis. So when it is shallow, then it will mean that a lot of sunlight will penetrate and allow the growth of planktons. Then you have beaches and islands within the lake. These ones provide good landing sites for vessels. We have a very contested rocky island called Migingo in Kenya. If you look at that piece of rock, you would wonder why Kenya and Uganda are in constant fight over just a rock in the water. It is not for granted that we have fought over that island for a long time. But that island is one of the areas of the many islands in the Lake Victoria that is very rich in terms of fish, and you'll find it that's why it is contested. These islands allow for vessels to be harbored there for some time before proceeding. Now, Lake Victoria is also surrounded by large towns or cities. We have the Kampala city, we have Kisumu in Kenya, and Mwanza in Tanzania. Now, these are cities with large populations that provide a ready market for the fish. Now, the lake also has numerous variety of fish or species of fish which are of economic value. Then the people around this area have that fish eating culture. It is no doubt the people of Kisumu and the surrounding counties have fish as a main dish as compared to many other parts of this country. Now, the fishermen have also tried to develop cooperatives. Now, the cooperatives that are coming up are helping the fishermen in marketing of their goods, and therefore avoid being exploited by middlemen. Now, the problems that face fishing in this region, that's a major problem that everybody knows. You might think that these are meme, because we are Kenyans and memes is our daily bread. This is not a meme, and these are not people that are trying to move a boat on land. This is actually Lake Victoria. The problem of water hyacinth has been a serious problem in this lake. Now, the hyacinth have two major problems. One is that the hyacinth will hinder transport, and that can be clearly seen from that photograph. Moving your boat in these waters can be extremely difficult. Number two is that when these water hyacinth rot, then they release acidic, organic acids, and of course the aquatic animals are also adapted to some kind of acidity. So when you add acidity to the water, then the survival of fish becomes a problem. We had a case recently where fish are dying in fish farms in Lake Victoria. This could be a contributing factor. So that is a serious problem, water hyacinth. Now, the other problem is overexploitation. The overexploitation here is mainly caused by the fact that Lake Victoria is well accessible by roads, well-developed roads. We have the Kisumu International Airport. So as a result of that, then the lake has been overexploited. If we compare this with the Lake Turkana, it is not that Lake Turkana is not a fishing ground. Lake Turkana has fish. But if you compare Lake Turkana and Lake Victoria is being overexploited because it is accessible. The conflicts between Kenya and Uganda over the Migingo Island, of course, this is one major area where fishing has been going on. Now, the conflict that has been there between Kenya and Uganda, of course, you have heard of cases of fishermen from Kenya being arrested and moved to Uganda. At one point, they hoisted their flag. I don't know whether it was ever brought down. They hoisted their flag on Migingo and claimed the island. So that conflict between Kenya and Uganda discourages fishermen. Nobody wants to go there to earn yourself some hill schooling activity in Uganda. If being in Kenya and being imprisoned in Kenya is problem enough, who wants to be in a foreign land in a cell? Definitely nobody. So most fishermen will avoid such areas. Then we have inadequate capital. We are poor it's a bitter truth. We may not accept, but that's the truth. So the inadequate capital, of course, limits us to get modern fishing equipment, and of course that again will reduce our catch. Then sometimes in the 90s, if I'm not wrong, we had introduction of what we the Nile perch, a species of fish. Now this Nile perch was introduced to try and reduce the problem of overfishing in Lake Victoria, but this Nile perch became a problem by itself. Now the Nile perch eats the bigger fish, and the bigger fish eat the smaller fish. So when Nile perch was introduced in this Lake Victoria, then it started preying on other species of fish, which reduced tilapia, and the tilapia is becoming a rare commodity in this country, as we shall look at in the case of Lake Naivasha as well. So that became a real problem. It became a problem to the other species of fish that it was consuming. Then we have a sparse population around Lake Turkana. The people of Lake Turkana are basically pastoralists. We have said we have fish in Lake Turkana, although the lake is a salty lake, but the levels of salinity are relatively low. So we have fish in Lake Turkana, but this fishing ground has not been that much developed. And the problem one is because the most people here are pastoralists, so they are not interested in this economic activity, and the population of Turkana is also relatively low, and therefore does not provide the required market. Now the other problem that Lake Turkana faces is a reduction in the water. It is a lake that is literally on the verge of dying because of the activities in Ethiopia. Now Ethiopia is on a mission to create hydroelectric power, and they have decided to dam this lake. River Omo, which is one of the rivers that provides water into Lake Turkana, and as a result, Lake Turkana has faced a dramatic reduction in the levels of water, which affects fishing. As part of the freshwater fishing, we look at this juncture, we shall look at fish farming in Kenya. Now we know fish farming is where you are providing the necessary conditions for the survival of fish. So you can see I've put a photo there of some place in my home village. If you wish to visit that place, it's called Trout Valley in Nyeri County. It's a very enjoyable place where you take your fish in the next to the river. This down here is Chania River, and you can see the fish farms there. Now I've said what fish farming is. It's the rearing of fish in ponds where you will provide the necessary conditions for the survival of fish. In Kenya, it is mostly practiced in Nyanza, in the bigger part of western of Kenya, the central parts of this country, the coast, and parts of the Rift Valley. So basically almost all regions of this country except the northeastern, which is relatively dry, and the drier parts of the eastern Kenya. Otherwise all the other parts practice fish farming. Now the fish ponds are built in areas of heavy clay, because clay is very non-porous, and the clay will therefore it's impervious, and therefore water will not pass through. It holds water to establish the fish pond. Now mostly you'll find they are located near rivers for two reasons. One is to supply the necessary water. Fish will only survive in water, so there has to be a steady supply of water. Then secondly is that the river water is moving, and that movement of water river ensures that there is a steady supply of oxygen which the fish needs to for survival. Now the fish is normally fed on grass, on vegetables, grains, compost, manure, and remains of processed fish, among other things. Then normally you'll grow plants inside the pond. The plants are supposed to ensure again a steady supply of oxygen in the ponds. Then you will introduce the fingerings. The fingerings are the young ones for fish. Normally you get the fingerings from the main hatchery is in Sagana. We also have Sagana on your way to Nyeri. Then you have others in Kavaru in Nyeri again, Kibos and Aruba. Those are also other hatcheries where you can get the fingerings. Now the main fish that is reared in ponds in this country is tilapia, because tilapia is relatively popular among the citizens of this country, among the population. Again, tilapia is a resistant species, and then they also breed fast. But in the cold areas like the Nyeri there, I've talked about Trout Valley. So normally in cold areas such as the highlands of central Kenya, like Nyeri, you'll find most of them having trout as the main fish species, because it does well in cold regions. Then the mudfish is also reared in. Having looked at fishing in Kenya extensively, now we'll move on to looking at fishing in Tanzania. Now, fishing in Tanzania is more intensive as compared to Kenya and Uganda. Comparing the size of the coastline in Tanzania, and fish is also more common in Tanzania than in Kenya. Now, fishing here is mainly in lakes, and the main lakes here are Lake Tanganyika, Lake Victoria, Rukwa and Malawi. Then you have numerous rivers where fishing is also practiced in Tanzania, including Malagasy, Pangani, Ruaha, among other rivers in the country. Now, Lake Victoria is the first fishing ground that we shall look at. Lake Victoria provides nearly half of all the fish in Tanzania. Then in this lake there is the use of modern techniques and equipment. One of the factors that favors fishing in Lake Victoria is that the area is surrounded by high population in towns such as Bukoba, Mwanza and Musoma, which of course provide a ready market. But one problem is one of undeveloped transport, which hinders transportation of fish to the interior towns. Now, the other major fishing ground is Lake Tanganyika. Lake Tanganyika is the deepest lake. It's a Rift Valley lake. Rift Valley lakes are normally deep. Now, again, it is the richest in the region in terms of fish. Fishing, again, around this region has been an old tradition of the people around Lake Tanganyika. The main fish here is daga or omena, the main fish caught in Lake Tanganyika. Then fishing is mainly done at night using the light and the special nets. The light is supposed to attract the fish, and then of course they are caught using special nets. Now the fish is processed in Kigoma and then sold to other parts of the country. Fish is also smoked and dried and exported to the neighboring Zambia. Then the rough storms in this lake discourage fishing activities, and that of course concentrates the fishing towards the shores of the lake. Then the low population hinders fishing around this lake, and the low population, we have said, around this lake will hinder fishing. Then we have Lake Rukwa. In Lake Rukwa, the biggest problem is fluctuation in the amounts of water in this lake. Then we have Lake Malawi, which is shared between Tanzania. It actually forms part of the border between Tanzania and Malawi. Now the fish here is dried and sold in the southern districts of Mbeya and Song. We move on to the last country in East Africa, that is Uganda. So we look at fishing in Uganda. Now notably is that Uganda practices only freshwater fishing due to the fact that Uganda is landlocked and therefore has no marine or access to marine fishing. Now fishing is mainly done in lakes, the main one being Lake Victoria, accounting up to 46%. Other lakes include Kyoga, Albert, George, Edward, and Katwe. Remember, most of the lakes in the Rift Valley side, the Western Rift, Gregory Rift Valley, that goes into Uganda. Most of the Rift Valley lakes in that section are freshwater because they have a system of emptying their water from one lake into another, and therefore the lakes are fresh, as compared to Kenya, where all the lakes, the Rift Valley lakes, are salty, with the exception of Naivasha and Baringo. Now fishing is also practiced in rivers, including River Nile, River Kagera, Kafu, Semliki, and the other, Katonga. Now, the one major problem that has faced fishing in Uganda is interruption by civil wars. Uganda has had a long history of civil unrests, with all the presidents from independence being overthrown, and then the country is find itself in turmoil until 1986, when the country was taken over again in a military coup by the current president Yoweri Museveni. That's the only time that we have had a stable government in Uganda. So that has interrupted the fishing industry over the years in that country. Then there's use of motorized boats in better parts of fishing, especially in Lake Victoria. The numerous islands, just like we said in the case of Kenya, numerous islands within Lake Victoria provides anchoring grounds for the fishing vessels. Then the people of Uganda, or the fishermen in particular, have organized themselves in cooperatives, which allows them to do marketing in a more organized manner. Then big towns like Entebbe, Kampala, and Jinja provide a ready market for the fish. Then fish is also a popular diet among many Ugandans. Then there are fish processing factories in Jinja where filleting is done, and then the fish is supplied to the market. Before we wind up on the fishing industry in the East African region, we shall look at the significance of the fishing industry, in particular to Kenya. One is that it is a source of income for both the fishermen, traders, and also the middlemen that are involved in that business. Secondly, it is a source of employment. The industry employs numerous people, either directly or indirectly, and employment leads to improvement of people's living standards. Thirdly, there are some sporting activities that are associated with fishing. Now, these sporting activities are tourist attractions, and as a result, they will end up earning the country foreign exchange. Then fish is a source of protein that supplements the protein from other products like beans and the rest, and it also supplements food from the agricultural sector. Now, fishing has also led to development of other industries. Other industries, for instance, cod liver oil, which is made from fish products, and as the result of that, of course, it leads to industrialization. Now, the cod liver oil that we are talking about here is used as a medicine, and it relieves issues of the chest. Now, if you are from a home where we have a small child, you probably might have come around this we are calling cod liver oil, because it does very well with young children in clearing problems of chests and cold. Fish oil can also be used directly as a cooking fat, which is not common in my community, but probably from other communities that is probable, or it is used. Then fish are also a biological control of mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are associated with malaria, so if we have a way of controlling them, then the better. And one known way of biologically controlling them is through fish. Fish eats mosquitoes and larvae that is in water, so when they do that, then they control the spread of mosquitoes. Lastly, the fishing industry has also led to the development of a transport industry, or the transport systems. Now, where we have fishing activities, the government needs to deliver the fish to the market in time before they get bad, and therefore they end up creating roads in these regions. We now look at some of the problems that face the fishing industry. We'll also be discussing some of the possible solutions. The solutions are just our suggestions, so the student is always welcome to be more creative and add more possible solutions depending on where they come from. Now, the first problem, and a serious problem for that matter, is the issue of pollution of water bodies. Now, water bodies are some of the areas that are badly polluted in this country, both the ocean and the inland water bodies, including lakes and rivers. All of us are familiar with the Nairobi River. That river, I hear, at one point used to have fish. Now, the river cannot support even bacteria because of the levels of pollution. Now, the inland water bodies and also the oceans can be polluted through oil spills, especially the oceans. Then deposition of industrial and also agricultural wastes in these rivers. Now, if you are familiar with the Naivasha, Lake Naivasha, there are so many flower farms that surround this lake. Now, when you spray insecticides and also all manner of chemicals on these flower farms, the water eventually gets back into the lake, creating pollution. Of course, the pollution increases acidity in the water and the toxicity of the water, which directly will kill some of the marine animals, or the fish we are talking about here. Now, we have suggested a possible solution. One very important solution to this is legislation. Legislation here meaning putting up laws on waste disposal. Now, NEMA is the main body that regulates. NEMA is the National Environmental and Management Agency or Authority in Kenya. It is the main body that was created by EMCA, or the Environment Management and Coordination Act of 1999, to coordinate and to also, as an authority, to coordinate and regulate pollution and all manner, the environment in general. Now, there are many regulations that NEMA has come up with: wastewater disposal, toxic wastes, and all that. The only problem is that NEMA itself has no prosecutorial powers, and then of course the issue of corruption in this country. So the follow-up is the problem, otherwise the laws are there. The other, of course, is to restrict agricultural activities near fishing grounds. The law is very clear on this again, that farming close to a water body is illegal in this country. But again, having to make sure that the laws are followed becomes a problem. That photo there shows some of the water bodies. The first photo there, you can see people washing cars. That should be Lake Victoria. That has been a problem there. Of course, when you wash cars inside the lake, these cars have a lot of oil, a lot of dust, all manner of chemicals. So you release the chemicals into the lake, which becomes now a problem. And the last time I checked, I think the county government of Kisumu had banned the washing of cars, so I don't know whether it has stopped. The photo on the right of that is the flower farms in Lake Naivasha. You can see how close they are to the lake. Now we have talked about that, the washing down of the chemicals, especially when it rains. The water that is being used to irrigate will still wash down the chemicals into the lake, making the lake toxic. Below there, you can see solid waste, a lot of it deposited inside the lake, which of course is a very sorry state. So I think we need to do much more about that issue of pollution. Number 2 is the issue of overfishing. The issue of overfishing has been experienced a lot in the accessible lakes. Lake Naivasha is one where almost all the manner of fish are almost being exhausted. Lake Victoria faces the same problem of overfishing. The problem here being caused by the use of unstandardized nets, and also the issue of unlicensed fishermen. Any other Tom, Dick and Harry just need a net and some boat and move into the lake to do fishing without any regulations. Now, the only solution to this problem, of course, is standardizing the nets so that you avoid overfishing. We can also license fishermen so that we know who is responsible and how many people are doing the fishing. Then fish farming is also being encouraged by the government. Fish farming will ensure that we avoid overexploitation of natural water bodies by keeping our own fish in the fish farms. And I think the government has even restocking can be done in this case. And I think it was done by the introduction of Nile perch in Lake Victoria. We have also introduced another kind of fish in Lake Naivasha, that is the common carp, which is more resilient as opposed to the tilapia. So these are just some of the possible solutions among others. The third is about improving transport. Transport is a problem, especially towards Lake Turkana. Lake Turkana being in a remote area. That has made us overexploit Lake Victoria because it is more accessible. Now, if we improve transport to Lake Turkana, then that can improve fishing in that area, which I think we have done. I think there is now a tarmac road all the way to the Turkana region. The other problem that fishing industry faces in this country is about inadequate market. The inadequate market is caused by the fact that we practice a lot of agriculture in this country. We have a poor fish eating culture. We are poor, so the purchasing power is low. Some areas, for instance, the Turkana region has low population, the market now becomes affected by that. Now, to solve this problem, we can construct roads. It's not that the roads will bring the market, but the roads will take the products to the market so that we have a wider market to other areas where fishing is not common. Then we can also educate people on the need of taking fish. Fish is white meat. It has a lot of protein, it has a lot of omega, it has a lot of nutritional value, much more than even compared to red meat from animals. So we need to educate people on the importance of eating fish so that they will get that culture of. The next problem that we shall discuss is the issue of inadequate capital. Now, inadequate capital limits the technology that our fishermen have or they have access to. That eventually leads to limited catch because they are only limited to fishing closer to the shores because of poor facilities. Now, the solution to that is creating cooperatives. The cooperatives serve two purposes. One is that they ensure a coordinated marketing of products so that the farmers get more returns from their venture. Secondly, they also extend credit facilities to their members so that they are able to buy the manner of technology that they need to improve their business. The only problem in this country again is mismanagement of some of the cooperatives, which again leads to losses. The next problem is the tropical location of our country. We are located within the tropics and in fact right under the equator. Now these are not the best conditions for the fishing industry because fish does not do well in waters that are warm, and as a result of that we have a problem with the fishing industry, especially marine fishing, and I think we discussed that in details. There's no solution to being under the tropics unless we look for fish that can survive under these conditions through research. Otherwise, there's nothing we can do about our tropical location. The other one is the narrow continental shelf. Again, we have that. We talked about that in details. So we talked about the Kilifi region, that side of the coasts towards Kilifi. Kilifi, I'm told, means cliff. Now, that side is very deep and has a narrow continental shelf. We say the continental shelf serves to ensure that we have a larger surface area for the growth of planktons. So when it is narrow, we have less planktons, less fish in return. Now, the only solution to this is looking for modern fishing equipment so that we are able to do deep sea fishing and increase on the amount or the quantity of products that we get. The next problem is the fluctuation of the water, of the volume of water in rivers and lakes, especially these inland water bodies, lakes and rivers. Now we are faced with climate change. It's a global phenomena. We are with it and we have to deal with it. Now that is reducing the volume of water, and we talked about the case of Lake Turkana. Rivers also drying up in this country. The only way we have to do it, and it is our duty, I'm an environmentalist in heart, we must conserve our water catchment areas. The problem with our country is that everything comes with a little bit, it is always spiced up with some politics. There are some issues that we must stop playing politics with. The issue of conservation of water bodies, the issue of conservation of catchment areas, water catchment areas, must be addressed not from a political view, but from an environmental view. That's why we had a problem when the people were being evicted from Mau. We had a lot of politics when people are being evicted from Mount Kenya, from Aberdare. I've said we have a spice of we have to spice up everything in this country with some politics. This should be exempted completely from politics. We must conserve these water catchment areas, otherwise deserts are expanding, desertification is real. We might find ourselves without rivers, without lakes. We have to act on that. The other problem I think we have discussed before is the growth of weeds. This is a serious problem in Lake Victoria. The water hyacinth, we saw that in real life or through the photo that I showed you earlier. And the only solution to this is mechanically and biologically removing the weeds. We cannot coexist with these weeds, so we have to remove them either mechanically or biologically. The other problem is human activities near fishing grounds. Again, this is a matter of being serious and enacting the laws that are there. We have laws governing the riparian land. So when we farm closer to water bodies, especially rivers, when the river is in flood, this river will do a lot of erosion. The materials are eroded will end up in a river, or in another river or a lake. That one causes siltation. Siltation reduces the depth. We have seen a big problem with most of the Rift Valley lakes, which are badly silted, and therefore when we have an increase in rainfall amounts, most of the lakes are over flooding. And Lake Nakuru was one, Lake Baringo, I think, and many other lakes in the Rift Valley, displacing too many people. We have said the solution to this, we must discourage agricultural activities through the law, and the law is clear on managing of riparian land. Lastly is boundary conflicts. We have border conflicts between Kenya and Uganda over our share of the Lake Victoria. We have a border conflict between Kenya and Somalia over some marine or some part of the Indian Ocean, which I think ended up in the ICJ, or the International Court of Justice in The Hague. And The Hague, of course, pronounced itself on the matter, and I think the area was finally given to Somalia. Now, the only solution to this is survey the boundaries. We need to have an open discussion with our neighbors on where the boundaries are. And I think the solution to boundary conflicts and conflicts with neighbors is only dialogue. We need to discuss with our neighbors before it escalates into war. We now move to our case study. This will be the final part of this topic. Our case this time is fishing in Japan, which we shall compare with fishing in Kenya. That map there shows us where the location of Japan. You can see Japan there. Japan is made up of very many islands. It's just about yesterday when I learned that the islands are about 7,000. Although there are other countries, I think the country with the most islands is Sweden. But Japan is made up of more than 7,000 islands. Some of them which are habited, some which are not habitable, or they are not inhabited. Now the main islands is, you can see them here. We have Shikoku, we have Kyushu, we have Hiroshima, we have Hokkaido and Nagoya. They are the main islands that make up Japan. So that is Japan. Below there we have the flag of Japan. It's just supposed to create some curiosity in my students so that people would like to know more about Japan. Japan has a long history. Japan bore the greatest responsibility for the Second World War. They suffered the most in the bombs that ended the Second World War. One was dropped in Hiroshima. 3 days. The Hiroshima one was known as a Little Boy. It was dropped in Hiroshima. You can see the position of Hiroshima on our map. The bomb killed more than 70,000 people on the spot. Many more people died after that. 3 days later, another one was dropped in Nagasaki, which was not meant to be dropped in Nagasaki. But you can read the history online about what happened, that it ended up in Nagasaki. It was called Fat Man. Again, it killed more than 75,000 people, and that ended the Second World War unconditionally. Japan surrendered. Read the history about that, Japan. After that, Japan embarked on development. That is why we are studying Japan here. We will still look at Japan when we'll be looking at industrialization in another topic that we shall still discuss. So read about Japan. It has a long history and it's interesting. Let us briefly look at the problems facing the fishing industry in Japan. One is the high pollution rates, and the pollution here is mainly from industrial effluent. The country being technologically ahead and very industrialized. Of course, industries produce a lot of wastes. So this waste sometimes ends up being deposited in water bodies, which of course is not favorable for fish. Secondly is the issue of overfishing. Japan having the technology to do fishing even in deep waters. So sometimes it ends up, or fishermen end up doing overfishing. And lastly, there is the issue of border conflicts, just like in Kenya. In Kenya, we talked about the issue of Kenya, Uganda, and Kenya, Somalia. So there's a very disputed South China Sea. The South China Sea is very disputed between China, Japan, and Korea. So this region, fishing is limited because of the conflicts that exist between those three countries. So now let's discuss the comparison between fishing in Kenya and Japan. The comparison here is in terms of similarities and differences. So first, we look at the similarities. One is that both countries carry out inland and marine fishing. We said that is, we talked about Kenya doing marine fishing and also inland fishing. Although there is more of inland fishing in Kenya, more of marine fishing in Japan. But either way, both countries have both inland and marine fisheries. Overexploitation is a common problem for both countries. We have discussed that. Fish farming is also practiced in both countries to supplement the natural fisheries. Then both countries experience the problem of pollution. Ours is mainly pollution from agricultural wastes. Japan, the pollution is mainly from industrial effluent. Then modern methods like refrigeration are used in both countries, although the technology is much more advanced in Japan as compared to Kenya. Now, fish is for local consumption and also for export purposes, although again Japan will export more as compared to Kenya. But either way, both countries use locally and export. Then in both countries, fishermen have organized themselves in cooperatives. We have seen that. Then in both countries, we have the problem of restrictions in the fisheries because of the border issues. That's what the restriction that we are talking about here. Now, when it comes to the differences, we have more differences between these two countries. One is that for Kenya, the fishing is mainly concentrated in inland waters. In Japan, it is mainly in the oceans because of the technology. Again, because in Japan, Kenya is the tropical conditions that we talked about. Now, fishing in Kenya is limited to closer to the shore, just a few kilometers from the shoreline. But in Japan, they fish in deep sea and even beyond their territorial waters. Now, in Kenya, the fish are less, simply because of the tropical location of Kenya. which we say the conditions are not favorable. In Japan, there's plenty of fish because of the convergence of the Kuroshio and Oyashio ocean currents. Then in Kenya, there's low demand for fish for reasons that we looked at. We said one, because of the purchasing capacity, two, because of the fish eating culture. So because of that, the demand for fish in Kenya is low as compared to Japan. Now, the common fish in Japan are called mackerel, Alaska pollock. In Kenya, it's mainly tilapia, the Nile perch, daga, and the black bass. The other difference is that cooperatives are more organized in Japan. So marketing is mainly done by cooperatives in Japan. In Kenya, it is mainly individual business. The cooperatives are just beginning, but mainly it is an individual business. Then Kenya faces stiff competition from all manner of countries. Japan, we have said, is a leading country in fishing, and therefore it does not face much of the competition. Then Japan has, of course, more advanced technology as compared to Kenya, and that, of course, increases their catch. Kenya has limitations in terms of technology, which lowers its catch. Now, if you have looked at all those points before we proceed to management and conservation of fisheries, every time you are doing comparisons, you are comparing between two countries. So if you are doing the differences, then you must tell us what is there in Kenya and what is there in Japan. If you are doing the similarities, then you have to tell us in both countries, because it's a comparison. So students should take note of that. Now we move on to the management and conservation of fisheries. What should we do? Because we need to conserve. We have said there's a problem and we might face a risky future. We need to manage and conserve our fisheries. Now, management is normally more of planning, effective planning. So we need to plan how to deal with fish resources and fisheries, or their habitats. Now, when it comes to conservation, it's more of action, direct action towards protecting the fish resources. So that is always, that's the difference between management and conservation. We have said management is more of planning, more of putting up laws. Conservation is the action. So always note that difference. Now, some of the management measures is research. Research is the future of this country. Research is beautiful. You are Form 4s. If the target for my videos are Form 4, this is Form 4 syllabus. So you'll be moving out to the universities. One main aim of university education is research, because the research is our future. We need to keep on doing research to establish the right species to keep, to establish how to manage our fisheries effectively. Then educating people. There is always need to educate people. There are some people, depending on your background, they are not conscious. When you throw rubbish in a river, some of these people literally have no the conscience to know that what they are doing is not right. So educate people on the importance of preserving our fisheries. Then the government should also inspect inland water bodies to ensure that there is regular flow to avoid siltation and all that manner of pollution. Now, conservation measures. One is enacting of law banning small meshed nets so that we avoid overfishing. The law should be clear on that. Improving transport and infrastructure so that we ensure that there is fishing. There's also fishing in Turkana so that we avoid overexploitation of Naivasha and Lake Victoria. Then we also need to enhance fish farming so that we save on our natural fishing grounds. Then we restock overfished waters, and I think that is what we did when we are trying to introduce the Nile perch, the common carp. The government should ensure that we have fingerings so that we put them into this water so that we replenish the overfished areas. Then you also have the banning of fishing temporarily. This should be enacted urgently so that we allow the regeneration. If we continue fishing throughout, that is not sustainable. So at one point we should stop fishing for a certain period of time, then we reintroduce it back, and that will allow regeneration, and that will be more sustainable. The licensing of fishermen, so that we regulate who is fishing. If we do not regulate and everybody is there in a lake doing fishing, then we might end up doing injustice to our fisheries. Then we should also have regular patrols. I think our Kenya Navy does this so that we avoid encroachment into our territorial waters, especially at the coast, and also the other shared water resources like Lake Victoria. We need to have patrols. We need to know where our boundaries reach so that we avoid foreigners overexploiting our waters. That marks the end of our topic. I hope you enjoyed the topic. From my side, I can only say thank you in style as you see it there. Kindly follow my page. I will keep posting more educative materials. We shall see each other in the next upcoming topic. Thank you and enjoy your time in school.